we are going to talk about a proposal that's come around, kind of started inside of Semantic Arts over the last little bit and kind of keeps getting discussed. We had a recent kind of flurry of discussion around May 18th, and it's about the kind of the proposal to maybe demodularize GIST. So I'm going to go through just a few slides to kind of set the stage, and then we'd love to get people's opinions on it. So start the recording, I guess, Ryan, if you haven't already.
I have started.
Let me know. All right, cool. So this is the GIST Council for June 4th, 2020, and the topic is demodularizing GIST, or at least looking into that. So, so GIST is a relatively small ontology. I think everyone on here has been using it. The current version is 9.2.0. Got 142 classes, 108 object properties, 22 data properties. So in the 270-ish total concepts, I guess. It's split currently across 18 modules. And the intent, I think, of the modulars, was the idea was easier change management and also the ability to utilize subportions of GIST without taking the whole thing. I have an easier picture to view of the modules here just because it's kind of small. This is what comes out of Protege. So there's a core that essentially pulls in everything else. So there's really 17 modules with content. The most general one would be the GIST top way over here. But you can see there's a lot of interactions between these modules, and there's a lot of modules. So, we've recently been discussing some of the issues with GIST modularization that we're kind of running into. And Semantic Arts has grown in the last couple of years, so we have more and more ontologists working with it internally, and we're together all the time working on projects. And so the issues come up. Some of the issues are concepts are not always defined in the most obvious place. For example, GIST category is not defined in GIST category, it's defined in GIST top, and then further elaborations are done in a module called GIST category. You sometimes find modules defined or concepts defined in multiple modules. Sometimes it's like the initial, maybe the top level with a label and a definition in one place, maybe some disjoints, and then maybe some other information in other places. Also, Protege users, not that Protege is mandated, but let's face it, a lot of us use it. When working with the 18 modules in Protege, we often make edits in the wrong module. If you're familiar with Protege, there's a little, it'll show you things from every ontology, but there's a little pull-down menu at the top, and things will be in bold if you're in the right ontology. It's very easy to forget to move to the right ontology to make the particular change, and then you end up getting things, axioms related to some concept in not the right place, and then you got to search and destroy that and try to fix it. I would say internally, in practice, many of us feel like it ends up, even though the intent was to, lower the change management load, it's kind of adding to it. We adds more time and confusion. Even for people that are not using something like Protege and just going into the files, they've got to figure out which file to make the changes in. So there's a proposal now that we're considering demodularizing it, which would really mean you just take that imports closure of GIST core, which is really all those concepts you saw, and really just put it in one file. Go ahead and call it GIST core. And that's to distinguish it from, there are other things out there, maybe less well known, but we have, for example, GIST-Fin, which is a finance ontology, that we would keep that separate. That's not core, everyone doesn't need finance stuff, but we would, that's why we might call this GIST core instead of just GIST, because we do have some other things that we work on out of Semantic Arts that might also get that GIST prefix. So really, that's laying the groundwork for the discussion. Again, we've done some discussing in-house. I'd love to get other people's opinions, but the first question I wanted to lead with is anyone out there or any of your clients utilizing just subportions of GIST? Just feel free to chime in.
Yes, I believe we are at Schneider Electric.
Okay.
Do you know which portions? Yeah. Portions?
I'll have to verify that. I haven't had touch with the recent developments. I'll have to get back on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I could give a good guess, having worked on that ontology. This is Michael Usheld. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Mark. Almost certainly a core piece is going to be the just units of measure. It'll be a central piece, and just magnitudes.
Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Everything revolves around that, and then there's a variety of other things.
Categories were in there for sure.
Yeah.
And agreement, because remember we had the offerings, so they are in the agreements.
That's right.
We use that. By the end of this meeting, I could probably get the full list, but it's I think the things that you mentioned we have been using.
So if they're using just category, as this is one of the examples Mark just gave, where just category itself is defined in just top, then that would mean they would be bringing in just top.
Right. Oh yeah.
I think everyone does though. You got to remember just top, as opposed to just core, which pulls in everything. Just top is the one thing that doesn't include anything, right? It's at the top.
And everything includes it.
Everything ultimately includes it.
Just top is the one that's somewhat problematic though, in that it's a whole basket of stuff.
Yeah, it's got top level definitions.
So if you're bringing in that, you're not really using any modular subset of just anyway.
Well, what you're doing, Rebecca, is there are some just modules that don't get brought in some of the time.
Right, but you're still, granted that, still bringing in a whole lot of stuff that supports those other modules.
That's correct.
It's like
you
an
may
upper
all you're trying to do is units and measures. You're still getting a whole lot of other stuff that underpins those other modules.
Okay. Anyone else seen that kind of handpicked? I've had a couple clients. One, I was the ontologist on it, and I tried to just pull in the things. I tried to be more selective. I think that was based on just 8, which maybe didn't have the IoT stuff in it, and nor the networks, but which actually we probably could have used. And then on my other clients have said, yeah, just give us the whole thing. So I've had one client, and they didn't make that choice. I did. They were not super ontologically savvy, so they just let me make that choice. But again, I had to kind of handpick. I don't know that we were using magnitudes. We, using, place, organization, agreement, a lot of it, but not all of it. Anyone else?
Yeah, every once in a while we get complaints, and people just sort of nitpick one little thing that, why do I need luminescence?
Oh,
one class, get over it.
Yeah.
I did find with some clients that, if I had Protege open and I expanded the whole thing, that yes, units of measure and a couple of other things that were big and didn't seem to apply to them immediately drew their attention. And can we just leave that out? Can we just leave that out? So I stopped showing that. I stopped showing a full open thing in Protege, and most people don't care. Or I tell them, or if somebody does ask, it's like, well, you just ignore that. You're not using it, so it doesn't affect anything.
Just want to, if anyone else has any examples of partial usage, we'll do that, and then I wanted to kind of get a feel for people's experience on maintenance.
Let me ask, Sam, briefly, to your knowledge, although in fact you are choosing a subset of the just modules, do you have a sense about whether if you brought them all in, that would be problematic in any way?
I don't think so. I mean, it's just that there will be a number of classes and properties that we wouldn't use, but apart from the weight of having unused classes,
Right.
I don't see a problem.
Okay.
You know, and just a comment along those lines, and I think this was, I don't remember if this was just 9.1 or just 9.0 over 8.0, but somewhere on the line, you know, we went back in and looked at reasoning. I know Dave did some work on this in particular, and at least in Protege, the current GIST, you know, with all its classes and all its concepts, which again is only about a couple hundred, reasons extremely fast. I think it's just a few seconds. So in terms of, you know, in terms of semantic weight, right, you wouldn't want to bring in a bunch of concepts if they really slowed things down, but this set of concepts still seems very lightweight in that sense.
Yeah, you know, very often when I start a project, I will start picking individual modules, but you do end up with most of them pretty quickly. You know, I'll start with address and drags in some other stuff, and yeah, it is probably easier just, and I know a lot of people just grab just core and grab the whole thing because it's easier.
Right.
Yeah, I had that experience too. I'm very much in favor of modularity in the abstract, and I've written ontologies that are highly modularized where you really can separate out the pieces. But in terms of GIST, so as I said before, the underpinnings of so many of these modules are in GIST top, and you end up bringing in more and more pieces that I now am in favor of de-modularizing GIST, because it's just confusing when you have an ontology for just category, but the class is not in that ontology, etc.
Yeah. You know, and there's two sort of schools of thought, I think, on modularization, maybe. One is that they're building blocks, and you take two or three of them, put it together what you need. And the other has to do with subsetting. In other words, easy way to say, okay, give me everything, and then I want these 10 things and everything they're connected with. Therefore, just give me a subset that isn't predefined like building blocks are. It's post-defined. You know, that for some people, and that would leave out luminescence, you know, for people who don't like luminescence. Right. You know, and I've looked at some algorithms for doing that. I don't think it would be all that hard if there even is a use case for that. Maybe there isn't.
We've actually been talking about that, Dave. I know Peter has chimed in a lot on that, and we had a thread on the GIST issue review topic that's internal to semantic arts. Sorry for people that are outside, but just to bring it up, that particular thing came up, that we could demodularize and then put some thought into what we call a subsetter, to where you could pare things down.
Yep.
And I think one of the arguments for bringing the whole thing in, regardless of what you think you're going to use at the time you're starting, is that, you know, just gives you a pretty good place to park just about anything that comes along in the business world. And if you have not brought the complete thing in, and you're running along and you get some new use case or some new domain or whatever, and if you just start adding to your ontology, you know, without like going back and checking the other parts of GIST to see if there's a good place to put you're going to you're going to come up, I mean, you come up with something probably perfectly legitimate and, and everything, but it will no longer kind of fit in the whole of the gist view of the world. And so I think, because just a small enough, bringing the whole thing in, those top level concepts are just, are very useful. Now, most of them still probably show up because they're in top, but some of the lower things also, give you a good place to park things or say, oh, this is, this is a peer concept for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thought about bringing in most of this, but not all of it? In other words, are there some optionals in this tree we have here?
I was wondering that same thing. The one thing that came to mind as a maybe outlier is the measure stuff, because not everyone needs that.
That's the most likely candidate, I would think.
I think, how about the IoT stuff? I don't think everybody.
Oh, that's true, actually. Yeah, that's. I like the principle, Dave, of maybe keeping most of this, but pulling out one or two things that seem outliers. I think you're right. IoT is more into an outlier.
So, but what about network? Right? Network is.
Hold on. Let's serialize this. Let me go, Dan.
Okay. Just okay, if you say IoT is not useful, but I think network probably is, and IoT is kind of a nice little adjunct to network. I think we'd have to do some analysis that would involve the user community before we definitely said, oh, we could leave this out. Make an adjunct.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with leaving network in for the reason you gave earlier. Once we describe what a network and a system really is, it's surprising. It shows up a lot.
Michael, did you have a comment?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Dan, I think that's a good point. That and again, I did the same thing, Dave, where I started trying to be a good ontologist and just use certain modules, but I think sometimes it depends on our clients. Most of them we try to think big and then start small. Sometimes they just start small, and so they're not thinking about broader things. But sooner or later, if they see the value of it, it seems like they want to expand and start thinking more universally. We should have other projects join, and then kind of like you were saying, Dan, they end up bringing in the concepts anyway as they broaden, because it really is meant to be an upper ontology that most things slot into. So I've seen that as well, that I would slowly bring in more and more modules, and after a while I'd start scratching my head and said I should have probably just grabbed just core and brought the whole thing in.
Yes. Does any of this have to have an impact on federation, particularly within an enterprise? Perhaps each division doing their own thing with GIST, and then suddenly federation becomes a problem.
Doing their own things, maybe with subparts.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. In a way, we're giving it seems like there would be more likelihood of the whole thing we espouse, which is easier integration if people are taking the core more holistically, especially with the danger, like I think Dan mentioned, that there's the possibility that you just kind of forget to go back and look in the GIST toolbox, and then you start building out things that you didn't have in the 5 modules you grabbed. And it might be possible that if you had looked at the whole thing, there were some grounding concepts already there. I'm not noticing anyone vehemently against it, so which I kind of thought this might be somewhat a passionate discussion. So I want to give room to the con. Is there someone who has a strong con, maybe?
Yeah, but real quick before we go to the con.
Okay.
One of the great things is the fact that we can even entertain this idea is because luckily we didn't make every module its own namespace.
I thought about that. Yep. Yes, I thought about that just earlier when I was putting the slides together, and I thought, you know, because some of within semantic arts, we're also looking at kind of you know, standards of ontology goodness. We're looking at Denny Radicek's work, and it was interesting. We noticed that some people say you shouldn't take one namespace and put it in multiple modules, and here we kind of have been doing that anyway. So yeah, we're not going to have we wouldn't have a concept change. So maybe that's more another pro possibly. It's not a pro as to why to do it, but it's a pro that if we do it, we're not going to be moving anything to a different namespace. But any strong cons that anyone on this call has? I mean, we've debated this a while. It's a safe space to kind of talk about that because we've had people on both sides. It's just, I would say, I think when the conversation was first out there, there may have been some sense that people are thinking, oh, in principle, you know, you don't want to get rid of modularity. And I think Rebecca kind of finally clarified that issue because none of us were saying in principle modularity is bad. We're just saying in this particular case with GIST, you know, is it right? Modularity is a tool you apply to the right situation, and we're starting to wonder in this case if we didn't need to apply that tool to what's basically in the closure of GIST core. And then getting to the pragmatics, I found that it's added I would say a lot of time to the kind of the maintenance of it. I think in some ways it might have added less time to people who weren't really paying close attention to it, and that might even be a reason why some things are in multiple modules. But when you really are trying to keep things clean, just making a quick change to GIST seems to be a lot longer because you have to get your head around where do I put this, and then make sure you put it there correctly, and make sure if you were a protege user you didn't accidentally put it in the wrong place and stuff like that. But any strong cons from anyone? No? The silence is deafening.
Yeah. Sounds like a consensus.
Going once, going twice. So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So are there any negative impacts? I can't think of any.
well, you know, the people that Dr. Sam's working with will need to,
Yeah.
you know, once there is a new version that comes out and it's, you know, the whole thing.
That's true.
I don't know that. Well, I mean, the difference will be they can either stay with the version they're on, or
yeah, that's true.
the all-in-one version. But the additions, the additional classes that show up and properties should in no way affect anything else they're doing. So
Yeah.
Right.
it might affect some of the documentation or even some adjunct sort of things there, as it might for all of us. But I think that would be the likeliest impact. Would be, oh, is sort of documentation in-house, you know, stuff that I need to update consequently.
One thing that, there's a couple of things that have to be done. I think very little impact, but one thing is they'll have to go through their code and change around any imports that they had. So it shouldn't take very long, maybe only 10 minutes or an hour at the most, I would guess. But also if they load up individual files into their triple stores, they'll have to reload those, and maybe they have to change around how they use named graphs to load different ontologies. So there could be a little bit of downstream impact, but not too much.
Yeah, it's possible. I haven't seen cases. There's no triple store that I recall using that actually makes use of the imports. It's kind of, you know, it's whatever you load in there. Like you said, you might change a load script, might change it from 18 files to 1. But
Yes.
I'm not aware of things where the imports would be included, would be an impact. And I'm trying to think of cases even where the import might be used in code. Obviously, I can't speak for everyone's code out there, but normally it doesn't seem to get involved that much.
Yeah, the only thing it would be if we always load all, I've always loaded all of just in one go in one named graph. But if there
Yeah,
was
me
a
too.
if there was a preference out there and some people just by choice decided to load each file separately, then they'd have to do a little bit of difference there. But again, all this is really quite minor, and it's also a one-time effect. And the big thing is, as Mark's pointing out, I don't see any way that code could be affected. I mean, somebody might be doing something really interesting and sophisticated with imports, but I can't think of what that might be.
Interestingly, just was one module back in the
Yep.
7 range. Was it 7.5 and things like that, Dave? Or was it prior?
7.
6. Was it
6.
7?
I think 7. I don't know,
7.5.
but it was certainly 6 was a one-timer. I don't remember which was the changeover.
Actually, it was all one, and then I split out just units of measure. So there's gist and units of measure, and then I put it back together. You know,
Humpty Dumpty.
I don't know. Seemed like a good
Yeah, this
idea.
is Humpty Dumpty. We're putting Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yeah, who said you can't? Just trying to think of, and we kind of pro-con. It doesn't seem like, I mean, there's a few small cons maybe, and again, in some particular cases, like Samuel's case, there would, but probably not problematic.
Interestingly and surprisingly, I think we might get away with this not being a major change because no actions are changing. This could be
Yeah, I
a
agree.
minor. This could almost be a minor patch, or maybe
I
something.
think it can be a patch.
That way, but
To me, it's just packaging.
Yeah.
It's not changing the concepts per se. Yeah.
That's right.
It's not changing any URIs, so I think it's just a patch.
Yeah.
And as Dave said earlier, it would be hugely major if we had different namespaces for each.
Oh yeah, then it would be for sure.
Yeah.
One of the pros we didn't mention, again, this is a protege byproduct, is that it has an annoying feature where it will, if any file refers to terms from another file, it puts these stubs in.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And
You are
you
so
can-
right.
Oh yeah.
Although Boris's script, I think he had plans to clean that up, but you know.
I have done that on multiple jobs. Yeah. Yep. You're absolutely right. It sprinkles those in there, and then if you continue to use Protege, you know, unless you go into the file to edit it, those kind of stay around forever. They're not needed. They don't hurt anything, but they're just like cruft that sits in those files after a while.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Being somewhat OCD, I have spent many times crawling through ontologies and pulling those out, only to have them reintroduced when someone accidentally has an import issue, you know.
Right.
So
It does mess up Git because you think there's a change in a file when there really isn't. There shouldn't be.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
That was easy. You know, I think I would recommend if we do this, let's call it 9.3, even though technically, because if anyone was using one of those submodules and suddenly they're all gone, they're gonna sort of go, what happened?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think a 9.3 makes sense for something
sure.
like this. It's a new feature. The feature is you don't have to deal with 18 modules anymore.
Yep.
Well,
The other major con of having it modularized is the first time you open it up, and if you're opening up a tool like Protege, you have to go find 18 different modules, one after the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, depending on the state of your catalog file.
Yeah.
This will actually make the catalog file obsolete.
Maybe we're coming to the conclusion that Protege is the problem.
Well, you know, Rebecca, I would say that, except I believe I know at least you and maybe Dahlia too, but I know some of you like to use text editors for it, and I appreciate that, right? I never want to make something kowtow to like one tool, but because of the way things are spaced out like that, it sounds like even if you aren't using Protege, the issues are there because the concepts are spread out and kind of in 2 or 3 places. Is that right? I see Dahlia unmuted there for a second. Didn't mean to.
I do use Protege, but I mean,
Okay.
I could see that it would be a pain either way.
Yeah.
It's not, but it is definitely part of the problem, but it's not the whole problem.
Yeah.
Is anyone using the just to drive the user experience? So in by that, I mean, are you using imports to prune the class or property trees so that the user doesn't see a bunch and then now they're going to see more?
Good question. I'm not.
Because our discussion has largely focused on the ontologist point of view. And if you've got this integrated in a live system with users interacting with it that aren't ontologists, you just need to make sure, because I've often had the need to simply, and it's not just specific, it's any set of ontologies where, you know, I've got this factually, semantically correct model, but yet I really only need a shape of it, right? That I want for the user to work against. And so I want to be able to go in and say, and define my shape in some form or fashion, whether you use a shape language like Shackle or something else. And I want that to be available to the end user application, which in most cases would not align to modular boundaries in GIST.
Right.
You know,
right. And that
different problem maybe.
Yep. But maybe
makes
that
subsetter.
Yeah, that subset might satisfy that one.
In fact, it's almost, that's almost a use case that really drives the subsetter even more. Because like you said, it really allows you to define the modules, so to speak. In this case, you might say, I want a module that represents things from a GUI perspective. It doesn't change the overall ontology, but I'd like to split it out and let these, these rubber banded sections, be used in some way in the
Yeah, I think it's very obvious after years of doing this that the semantically correct model is where you start, but when you get to the end user use cases, you often do need to blend things that wouldn't be blended at the modeling layer, but do need to be blended from a work process user experience layer. So yeah, subsetter would be nice. That'd be really cool.
Yep.
I mean, the benefit of the subsetter is that it's not just specific. It will work across all the ontologies that we use and enable us to trim down where we're importing other ontologies to deal with just the class and properties that we that are necessary for the ones that we use.
Yeah, great point.
So in that respect, it's very similar to the Google Closure library, which when you're importing all manner of JavaScript libraries, what you can do with that is get rid of all of the stuff that you don't need, that you don't use from where you've been importing other libraries. It enables you to really condense your code base very significantly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Having said that, the problem with it is actually finding one that works, because those, as we were discussing, those subsetting functions that are in the OWL API, of which there are 3, they end up giving you actually an awful lot more than what you need. And this is where I need to spend some time with Dave's algorithms to see if we can use Sparkle queries and a few other things to begin to cut down to what it is that we actually need.
Yep.
Any other thoughts on this topic?
I think that's a wrap.
I think it is.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
I have just a question that's totally tangential, and if there's a window for that, I can do it, or I can just do it right now.
Yeah, I think if we wrap that up.
Good with it. Sure, why not?
All right, and this is just a quick question. What percentage of projects do you encounter are using name graphs for the A box?
Oh, the A box.
Yeah,
All of
I
them.
definitely have.
100%.
100%.
Yeah, we always do that. That's modularity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
It makes life much easier.
Although the real question is, what do they use the graph for? And each is different, you know?
Right. But if the question is somewhat around, is anyone just throwing things in the default graph? I would say I don't have any projects where anything is in the default graph. Everything gets a name graph. Whatever the strategy is, like you say, Dave, differs, but everything's in a name graph versus a default graph so that the triple management is easier.
Yeah. Because almost inevitably, some of the data needs to get updated periodically. And so that name graphing helps that. Other stuff, keeping the T box separate from the A box, and name graph things, that helps. So I haven't seen a downside at all to using name graphs for the A box.
Okay, good. I'm just kind of doing a little audit there. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good one.
Good one.
Motion we adjourn.
Great. Thanks. Take care.
Okay.
Guys.
Thanks,
Hi, everybody.
everyone.
Thanks,
your
Steve.
time.
Thanks, Mark.
That's right.
Thank you very much.